Yo, what's up, homies? Some people was asking me, about that elk ivory bracelet I made. Like, what's that mean? And, I was saying how the elk to the Lakota Oyate, it represents strength and power. But it also represents love because the elk is kind of like the pimp of the forest. And a person was getting a good chuckle out of that. But I wanted to tell a story about what I meant by that. And I think that if people started telling more stories, then we'd get to learn each other a little bit more and might start having more respect for cultures that we may not understand. This is probably going to be a longer video, so if you're in a hurry, don't waste your time. But if you want to learn something cool, this is a pretty neat little thing here. So, back in the day, a man would court a woman, right? And it's not like dating like how we think of it in America these days. It wasn't a private thing. It was very public. So a man, the females in his family would make him a blanket, and he'd dress his finest and walk to the teepee of the woman he loved, to court her with that blanket, and they would sit and the whole tribe be watching the couple, and if this young man could win the girl's heart, and if he was lucky enough to win her heart, well, then he'd offer her father some ponies and get to marry her. Excuse me. Well, one day, a long time ago, there was a young boy, and I'm not sure if anyone remembers his name. I don't. If you know it, let me know in the comments. But there was this young man, who was fearless on the battlefield and fearless in the hunts. But when it came to the woman that he loved, he'd get so shy that his tongue would go silent. He wouldn't be able to talk to her, and he was really, really nervous about it. He would think about this girl day and night, and he'd even dream about her. And even in his dreams, he would be so shy that he couldn't talk to her. And he would notice other young men without hesitation whistling for her attention and, going to her parents' teepee. And, he was getting frustrated. So one day he just left the camp to wander alone. And in that first day, in that frustration, he drew his bow. And without hesitation, he let an arrow fly into the air. Wasn't even aiming at anything. But to his surprise, the arrow did something different. It didn't do what an arrow usually does. It stayed in the sky. It didn't land. It stayed aloft. And it was moving slower. And the man realized that the arrow was pointing him to something. So he realized too that the arrow was moving slow enough that he could follow it. So he followed that arrow all day. And then in the evening, it landed by a stream. So he slept by that stream, and in the morning time, he shot his bow again, and the arrow did the same. It flew through the sky, and he followed it until the evening come, and it landed by another stream. He did this for 4 days. And on the fourth day, when he was waking up, like when you're in that place between dreams and being awake, he was waking up by the edge of the forest by this stream, and two elk men, like two male elks, walked out of the forest with a flute. And one of them tooted on that flute, like blew the flute. And the noises coming out of that flute were so beautiful that even the forest itself seemed to stop breathing. Like every plant and animal held its breath so they could listen to that song. And one of the elk men said how this flute was made from cedar, because cedar is where it grows where the wind blows, and how the woodpecker made the holes where his fingers were going to go. And the other elk explained to the man how all of the animals and the birds helped to make this flute, and their voices are inside of it. And when you play this flute to the woman that you love, we will be singing with you. Our voices will sing with yours. And with this flute, you'll be able to express your love for this woman more than your voice alone could ever do. And then the Elkmen disappeared. And the young man looked down, and there was the flute laying on a bed of sage. And so he picked up the flute, started kind of making some sounds with it, and the cranes all started flying around him, joining him in the song. And he learned the crane song, and then he would imitate other animal sounds that he'd heard. And he walked back to the camp for 4 days. And by the 4th day in the evening, when he landed back at his camp, he'd gotten pretty good with that flute, making those sounds. And he stood on top of a hill in front of the village and played his song. And it was so beautiful that every available woman in the village fell in love. But there was one woman, the woman that the young man loved, that knew that song called to her heart and her heart alone. And she walked up on that hill to join the man. And they never spent another day apart. And since that time, other men have used that flute to court, because that's elk medicine given to us by the elk. And this is also why traditionally a Lakota man would never ever play a flute publicly if he was married, because the voices of and the songs of all those animal nations put in that flute were for him and his woman alone, not to be shared with like other women. These days it's different, like you'll have like a professional musician, like it's their job to go do a concert and stuff like that. But it wasn't always that so. Wasn't always that way. But that's actually what I meant when I said that the elk is kind of like the pimp of the forest. You see? He really is. I hope you guys like the story. And if we start sharing our stories, then we won't ever lose them. But always remember to try to tell it the best that you can, the way it was told to you. That way it doesn't go changing over time. Peace, homies.